This is a difficult subject. As well as being involved in Four Corners Festival, I'm also involved with this group as well, which is called StopAttacks. I've given you a page on it as well. Our website, Twitter, a little bit about it as well. As a group of people, our aim is to make ourselves irrelevant and redundant. We don't want to exist, and we'd love your help to help us not to exist anymore. But in some form or other, our society here has been living with 50 years of punishment-style attacks, people taking their own law into their own hands, vigilantism or whatever, and people might say it's even longer than that. You could actually go back into history, but certainly the most recent troubles go back to the early days. People might remember the likes of tarring and feathering, etc. So this is where, for example, the likes of people are assaulted or shot or excluded or whatever. And so this campaign is working to end all paramilitary-style attacks. I say it's a very difficult one. So for example, if you are living in an area where there's a lot of antisocial behaviour, where there's issues with drugs and theft and car crime, mental health issues, the list goes on, where you're definitely not living in a comfortable area, and where you have some of these people, it seems as if they might be arrested by the police, and to go back to an earlier issue, the lack of confidence in policing, the lack of confidence in security service and the justice system is a huge issue. But at the end of the day, and you'll see this Martin Luther King come up whatsoever, it is unjust to actually take the law into one's own hands, or to go to somebody's door, to rap somebody's door and put them under pressure and say, you need to do something about Martin Magill, he's been out stealing cars again, he's broken into somebody's house or whatever it might be. So this campaign focuses specifically on this issue of paramilitary-style attacks. And probably for us, the biggest difficulty is the whole question of people justifying it at some level or other. So when, for example, there are some of these people in community perceived as drug dealers or whatever it might be, there can be all sorts of comments. And we've just given, this was a campaign we ran 2 years ago, and we ran this campaign at the start on International Children's Day. Now we had a very specific focus on young people. And StopAttacks got very good support from the church leaders. They came out with a very significant statement. In a sense, making it very, very clear their opposition to this type of violence as well, and calling for support for the likes of youth clubs and youth leaders and the very good community work, to go back to a point made earlier on about young people, etc. So that whole sense of how do we change people's attitudes to that. And I'm going to go back to Sean's point. I mean, so for example, to go back and think about some of the people who may be actually involved in crime, how do you get into their shoes? And maybe to go back to some of the start, and probably the reality is that we take a look at some of their homes now. Once you start going down that line and starting to see that, we're into this whole thing, oh, this is soft justice or whatever, and that's why we have that sense of frustration. So what we have in so many cases is people say, I'm frustrated, police do nothing, he's in and out of the courts, revolving doors and all the rest of that, etc. So our campaign, StopAttacks, is about challenging that. Because for some people, and this was part of our campaign again in 2017, November 2017. So it's almost this idea. So for example, for someone involved in an armed group, that one of his jobs, and more often than not it's his jobs, of course, very seldom I'd imagine females would be involved in actually taking out and shooting. So the likes of it's almost like it's become normalised. To go back to the pillars, the very first one, and yes it's a big word, the anthropological, that whole sense of how do we humanise, and Sean puts it very well. It's a hard one to do, but at the end of the day, these are somebody's sons, for the most part, or daughters, and who may be involved in this. We did it because, generally speaking, the rule of hand when it comes to these attacks, listen carefully to them. Republicans shoot and loyalists beat. Vast majority of the beatings will be on the loyalist side of things. And again, it's that whole sense of, we find ourselves in a situation where mothers are taking their sons, or fathers are taking their sons to be shot or beaten. I had a meeting with the Chief Inspector in West Belfast during the week, and he was talking about that situation where a recent case somewhere, I think in West Belfast, where a father had taken his son to be shot, the gun had jammed, and the two of them were told to come for a walk and then come back again for it to be completed. And the chief inspector said to me, "Could you imagine the conversation between a father and a son before he was taken back to the shop?" So that whole sense of what do we do about it? And so our campaign is really focusing on how do we help change attitudes. And I'm going to give you a couple of very practical examples. So this one is a year ago, and a lot of money, slightly different because this seemed to be on the loyalist side of things. As I say, it goes slightly against, because normally as I say, at loyalist speak. And what happened was, oh sorry, I've managed to do it, that would be too hard here. What happened was, a woman called Pat Crosley, who's actually here, she doesn't know I'm going to put this statement up actually, from the Ballymoney Churches Forum, made contact with some of the local ministers who are part of this forum, and decided to say that we as a group of churches needed to say something. Pat's from the Ballycastle Church Action Group. And so this was a group of people who decided that they couldn't let it go by, they needed to say something. And then another situation, ARDS, or Newton ARDS, there have been a number of issues, and there's some concerns about a couple of the estates in the Newton ARDS area again. And it seems like for the first time that the churches got together to make a very clear statement and challenge to sort of say not in our name. But at the same time, if I could get you to take a look at that as well, that they also wanted to show a way out to those involved who are members of our group, that if they wanted to come and talk and wanted to speak. Okay. So if I just do the first part, is we were shocked and saddened to learn of the attack that took place on the evening of Thursday, 25th of July. This activity has no place in our town, which is known as warm and welcoming place. And then the piece I was drawn attention to is local church leaders are willing to talk confidentially to anyone who wants to turn their lives around. So there's the whole danger of condemnation, and that's one of the things that we hear back at times as a lobby group, that we're into condemnation. Now, we're trying to address some of the other issues as well. So in terms of getting ourselves and committing ourselves to this work of peace, and one of the slides at the end talk about Christians as peace builders. So a sense of beginning here, internally, beginning with conversion. So that sense of how can we really be involved in peace unless we're at peace with oneself, and then from others it stretches out, and then it fits in very well. And it's been really fabulous just to hear again the emphasis on creation and the environment, and I mean really great to hear of Laudato Si and the influence it's actually had over the last number of years, that again when we're looking at peace, we're back again to this question of the environment.